So this set of videos is about replacing our 23-year-old B&G instruments. They were on the old NMEA 0183 system, and what I wanted to do is replace them with a single multifunction display, which is on the NMEA 2000 system. But that means replacing the controller with the ITC5, replacing the display with the i70, and replacing all of the transducers as well. So I've just taken delivery of the Raymarine T70216 package. So this is the first time I've upgraded to the NMEA 2000 system, and this is going to replace the old B&G stuff because we've got sonic speed and depth and wind, and they're all kind of very intermittent. So instead of trying to replace it bit by bit, which would probably end up being just as expensive, I'm going to replace it with this. It wasn't cheap, it was 1,500 euros. I could have got it a lot cheaper in the UK, but at the moment we're in lockdown because of the coronavirus. This is in the box. I've got the ITC5 unit, the wind indicator, the i70 multifunction display, various cables, and the transducer, which I've already started fitting, so the actual transducer isn't there, that's just the housing. So the first job is we're going to have to widen. Guys! We're going to have to try and widen the gap for the transducer. At the moment it's 4.5, it needs to be 5. So it's going to be tricky. I'm going to take the old housing out and then put a new one in, which involves basically drilling out what's there and reforming the flange to make it sit parallel with the seabed and build it up with fiberglass. Bit of a tricky job, but we're out of the water, so it's a good time to do it, I suppose. The only time to do it. And then I've got to feed the lines, mount a few lines through from the transducer, and then set up the ITC5, and then I'm going to drill another hole, widen another hole for the multifunction display. So AML's original sonic speed was quite innovative at the time. It sends a beam through the water, so there's no mechanical parts to it. However, over time they all break down, as everything does on a boat, and it's quite complicated to change those particular instruments out. So what I'm going to do is replace the depth sounder with an Airmar Triducer, which has got a paddle wheel and a depth sounder on it. The problem is it's a different diameter, so I've got to take out the old one and then got to re-drill a bigger one. So that's the old B&G depth transducer. So I'm just removing the housing. So what I've had to do is get rid of the old housing, which was really well embedded in there. In fact, in the end what I had to do was use a reciprocating saw up inside to chop it up into bits and then chisel it out. I'm going to have to clean it all off, bore a bigger hole with it, which is a tricky thing in itself, but before I do that, what I want to do is build up the flange on the bottom of the keel so it points straight down and not at an angle like that. So normally you'd use epoxy resin under the waterline because it's more waterproof, but I've only got polyester resin, but it's okay, it's not load bearing, and I'm going to cover it in epoxy filler and epoxy paint at the end, so it should be fine. So I've cut these kind of donut shapes out and I'm going to build those up and eventually get it to fit that. I had to basically build up the layers of fiberglass in a sort of inverse donut shape, but offset, so I could create a wedge shape, if you know what I mean. So I've built the flange outside from many layers of fiberglass matting. The original hole is 45mm and the hole we need to drill is 50mm, so it's a very fine sort of margin of error. So what I've done is I've put another thin layer of fiberglass matting over the top of it to cover the hole. I've got a 45mm hole cutter here, which I'm going to drill through the matting that I've put over the hole, and that'll give me a pilot hole then to drill from the other side with a 50mm hole cutter. So I've never tried this before, so I'm hoping it's going to work. So just to clarify, I had a 45mm hole cutter which fitted exactly into the existing hole, which meant it kept the arbor dead center, so I could drill a hole, a pilot hole, into the outer layer of fiberglass, which would then give me a center hole for the 50mm hole cutter from the other side. So that pilot hole now should hopefully be dead center, and I'll basically use that as the pilot hole from the other side to drill the 50mm hole. So that's a perfect fit now, but all I need to do is just square off that flange. As you can see, there's a few gaps around there, so I need to square that off and get it nice and flat, and that should be a nice cozy fit. For jobs like this, it comes in really handy. It's like sort of a mini Evolution belt sander, a 40 grit or an 80 grit, and it really bites into the fiberglass in small areas. I've drawn around that with some marker to use that as a template, and I'll grind back all of these other edges just to make a smooth flow of water. I've also given that a wipe round with some thinners, and I'll probably try and just fill any minor cracks with some two-part epoxy. Then I'll re-drill it, and then we should be good to go. It's worth mentioning at this point that we did this all during lockdown. If you want to see all the shenanigans that were going on behind the scenes, then check out the travel vlogs 65 and 66. So while we waited for a decent day to do the epoxy and the anti-fouling layers, I moved inside to do the wiring. So to get this new transducer in, we have to take the old one out, so the actual cable goes all the way to the nav station. So what I've had to do is mouse it with a piece of string and mouse the old line out, and I'll use the same mousing line to put the new one back in. And the animals are great because they've got conduits running everywhere, but the problem is because they're in cupboards in the backs of the nav instruments and everything, especially when you're a liverboard, you've got to kind of pull everything out, and so there's mess all over the boat. Simple as the job is, there was quite a lot of upheaval that goes with it. So then we had a weather window to add the epoxy and the anti-foul layer. If you do want to see how we did that, then check out the maintenance video on raising the waterline and adding the anti-foul. So I'm just putting some anti-foul on the housing, and just in the cavity there for the speed and depth. You can actually paint over that because it's kind of like a sonic beam, which it's not affected by the anti-foul, but that obviously protects it and stops the barnacles building up inside the paddle wheel. Give it a good coating there. There's a little arrow there, which means that it's got to point forward. So I put plenty of marine sealant all the way up the housing on the outside. That's the washer. Again, I'm going to have to check down below to make sure that arrow is still pointing forward. So you've got to get all the excess off to make a smooth water flow over the hull. Okay, that should do it. Okay. A tip I picked up from my painter and decorator mate that you saw in the last video, Werner, was to use baby wipes on marine sealant. It really clears it up well. So that was the flange created and the housing installed, and it was perfectly parallel with the ground. So finally, I'm just going to lubricate the O-rings here and then the actual valve in there. And then there's an arrow on the top of the Airmar unit which points towards the bow, so that ensures that the little impeller there actually works well. And then finally, just as some reinforcement, there's some wire that they supply which goes from the nut to the cap. There's a loose bonding wire here, so I'm just going to reattach that. Also started numbering the cables as well, because I pulled miles of cables out of this boat and none of them are traceable. I'm going to start doing everything from now on. So the next videos I'll be removing the old B&G wind transducer and replacing it with the Raymarine one, and also I'll be doing the wiring for the ITC5 and fitting the i70 multifunction display unit. So thanks in particular to our patrons for supporting us through these crazy times. I do like the occasional beer, as I've mentioned before, so if you do want to become a patron, click on the link below in the description and become a patron for no more than the price of beer a month.